The Vesuvius Club, a bit of fluff, written and read by Mark Gatiss. Chapter 1. Mr. Lucifer Box Entertains. I have always been an appalling judge of character. It is my most beguiling virtue. What, then, did I make of the Honourable Everard Supple, whose likeness I was conjuring onto canvas in my studio that sultry July evening? He was an imposing cove of 60-odd, built like a pugilist, who had made a fortune in the diamond mines of the Cape. His declining years, he told me during the second sitting, when a client begins to thaw a mite, were to be devoted entirely to pleasure, principally in the gaming houses of the warmer and naughtier parts of Europe. A portrait, in his opinion, and his absence, would be just the thing to hang over the vast baronial fireplace in the vast baronial hall he had recently lavished 100 thou upon. The Supples, it has to be said, were not amongst the oldest and most distinguished families in the realm. Only one generation back from the Honourable Everard had been the less than Honourable Gerald, who had prospered only tolerably in a manufactory of leather thumb braces. Son and heir had done rather better for himself, and now to add to the title, of sorts, and the fake coat of arms being busily prepared across town, he had his new portrait. This, he told me with a wheezy chuckle, would convey the required air of old-world veracity. And if my painting were any good, that hurt. Perhaps I might even be interested in knocking up a few carefully aged canvases of his ancestors. Supple blinked repeatedly, as was his habit, one lid lingering over his jade-irised glass eye, the left one, as I let myself imagine him tramping into the studio in doublet and hose, all in the name of family honour. He cleared his throat with a grisly expectoration, and I realised he'd been addressing me. I snapped out of my reverie and peeped around the side of the canvas. I've been told I peep rather well. "I do beg your pardon. I was absorbed in the curve of your earlobes." "I was suggesting dinner, sir," said Supple, flipping a half-hunter watch from his waistcoat, "to celebrate the successful conclusion of my picture." "I should be delighted," I lied, "but I feel it only right to warn you that I have a peculiar horror of artichokes." The Honourable Everard Supple rose from the doubtful Louis cans into which I'd plonked him, sending a whisper of paint flakes to the dust-sheeted floor. "We might try me club, then," he suggested, brushing the sleeve of his frock-coat. "Or do you have somewhere you artistic types favour?" I rose and ran one of my long, bony hands through my hair. They are long, white, and bony, I cannot deny it, but very fine. Waistcoat and face flecked with paint, I shrugged. "As a matter of fact, I do," I said. "Charming little spot in Rosebery Avenue. Come back at 8 and we'll drive over." So saying, I suddenly turned the easel on its squeaking casters, revealing the portrait to the golden light washing through the skylight. "Behold, your immortality." Supple creaked forward on his expensive boots and fixed a monocle, rather unnecessarily, into the orbit of his false eye. He frowned, cocked his head to left and right, and grimaced. "Well, I suppose you get what you pay for, eh, Mr. Box?" "My name is Lucifer Box, but I imagine you know that. Whether these scribblings eventually form the core of my memoirs, or are found secreted in oilskin wrappers at the bottom of a lavatory cistern years after my demise, I have no doubt that by the time you read this, I will be most terribly famous." I handed Supple his soft kid gloves with as much brusqueness as I could muster. "You don't like it?" The old fool shrugged. "Just not sure it's terribly like me." I helped him into his overcoat. "On the contrary, sir, I believe I have caught you." I smiled what my friends call, naturally enough, the smile of Lucifer. Ah, London in the summertime. Hellish, as any resident will tell you. Even in those first few innocent years of the new century, it smelled of roasting excrement. So it was with kerchiefs pressed to mouths that Supple and I entered the dining rooms I had selected. They were alarmingly unfashionable, but in the long light of dusk, the white-panelled plainness could have been called Vermeer-esque. Not by me, you understand. A flypaper above the hearth twisted lazily, amber and black like a screw of earwax. This place, I told Supple, was owned and run by a woman called Delilah, whose crippled daughter I had once painted as a favour. She was not, perhaps, the bonniest thing, I confided, as we settled down to eat, lost both hands to a wasting disease, and had them replaced with wooden ones, and, oh, her little legs were in horrid iron rings. I shook my head despairingly. "Ought to have been exposed at birth," her father said. "Nay," cried Supple. "Aye, but her dear mother loved the little mite. When I came to paint the portrait, I did my best to make little Ida look like an angel. Prophetically enough, though it turned out she had some pluck." Supple wiped soup from his pinkish lips. Sentimental old Victorian that he was, a tear sprang to his one good eye. Most probably the death of little Nell had been like mother's milk to him. "Poor Ida," I sighed, picking idly at a chicken leg, "grabbed from her bath chair by a gang of dacoits and sold into bondage." Supple shook his head mournfully. No doubt an image of the doe-eyed cripple had flashed into his silly old brain. His fingers tightened on the fish knife. "Go on. What happened?" "She made a boat for it, God bless her," I continued. "Took off across the rooftops with the fiends in hot pursuit." Blink, blink. The jade glass eye regarded me steadily. "And then?" I closed my eyes and steepled my fingers. "She got as far as Wapping before her brittle little legs gave out. She fell through the roof of a sugar merchant's and into a vat of treacle. Of course, with those wooden hands, she could get no purchase on the rim, and she drowned. Very, very slowly." Drinking the last of an indifferent burgundy with an air of finality, I clapped my hands and turned the conversation towards more cheerful matters. Now I had Supple's trust, it was time to betray that of others. I wanted the practice. I regaled Supple with what I know to be an inexhaustible supply of anecdotes, not many of them are true, certainly not the best ones, concerning the greatish and goodish who have paid yours truly not nearly enough to be immortalized in oils. "You are very indiscreet, sir," laughed the old man, cheering up. "I'm glad not to have confided any of my secrets in you." I smiled my wide smile. Supple, for his part, talked at length about his time in South Africa and the great adventure a young man like me might have there. He told me about his own daughter, a great joy to the old man by his account, and I nodded and smiled with the air of sagacity I like to assume for such occasions. I put on a good show of being fascinated by his colourful account of dawn over the Transvaal as I took up my watch and stared at the second hand racing over the porcelain dial. I could hear the soft action of the tiny spring. It was midway between the fish course and the pudding, as Supple opened his mouth to begin another interminable tale, that I did the decent thing and shot him. A stain spread across the breast of his stiff white waistcoat like poppy petals emerging through the snow. How I wish I'd had my sketchbook with me. The scene was a riot of crimson possibilities. There now, I've shocked you, haven't I? What the deuce can Mr. Box be up to? Are customers in such abundant supply? Well, you just have to be patient. All good things, etc. Supple's face, never particularly smashing, as you may have gathered, froze in an expression of pained surprise, and a little bubble of red spit frolicked over his lips. He slid forward onto the table, where his teeth met the rim of his pudding bowl with a shocking crack, like the knees of an out-of-practice supplicant. I watched smoke curl from the end of the snub-barrelled pistol I'd used, then replaced the weapon under a jelly mould, silver and shaped like a sleeping hare, where it had been, until recently, ensconced. Lighting a cigarette, I repocketed my watch and, rising, dabbed a napkin at the corners of my full-lipped mouth. It's a very pretty mouth. More of it later. Taking up a dessert spoon, I dug it into Supple's left socket and carefully removed the old fellow's glass eye. It popped out, with just a little poking, and lay nestled in my palm like a gull's egg. I looked at the iris and smiled. It was just the shade of green I had in mind for a new tie, and now I had a match from my tailor. What a happy accident! I slipped the eye into my waistcoat and draped the napkin carelessly over the dead man's head. A large and ugly mirror hung over the fireplace of the dark little room. I checked my appearance in it, very acceptable, adjusting my stance to avoid the mottled edges of the glass, which tended to obscure the wonderful cut of my best tailcoat, and pulled the tatty bell rope that hung close by. The doors were opened almost at once by a huge woman in a daffodil-coloured frock. Her gin-flushed cheeks, abutting a long, blotchy nose, gave her face the appearance of bruised knackers in a harness. "Good evening, Delilah," I said, with just the slightest turn from the mirror. "Evening, sir," said the drudge. She shuffled a little awkwardly, glanced at the table, and cleared her throat. "Everything in order, sir?" I turned, cigarette between teeth, adjusting my white tie with both hands. Oh, yes, the burgundy was deadly and the partridge a trifle high. Other than that, a most satisfactory evening. Delilah nodded her massive head.
"And the other gentleman, sir?"
"Will be leaving us now, thank you." Delilah thrust both mitt-like hands under the armpits of the Honourable Everard Supple and dragged the one-eyed corpse with apparent effortlessness towards the doors. I hopped athletically over the dead man's legs, sweeping up my cloak and topper from a chair. "How's little Ida?" I asked, clapping the hat to my head.
"Very good, thank you for asking, sir. No doubt be seeing you soon, sir,"
grunted Delilah. "No doubt," I replied. "Ta-ta." I stepped over the threshold of the mean little dwelling and out into the sultry evening. Thinking I deserved a little treat, I hailed a hansom. "The Pomegranate Rooms," I said to the driver. Work was over for the moment. Time to play. 20 minutes later, I was dropped a short distance from said night spot and made my way towards its mouldering wedding cake facade. The slattern on the door opened it a crack and treated me to a quick view of her form. Poured carelessly into a garish oriental gown, she had the look of a pox-ravaged sultana, both the potentess and the dried fruit. I slipped through the grimy doorway. "Any riff-raff in tonight, my sweet?" I inquired. "Plenty," she gurgled, taking my hat and cloak as persons on doors are wont to do. "Splendid!" The Pomegranate Rooms were small, sweltering, and poorly lit by gas sconces stained tobacco yellow, lending the whole a colour not unlike the bitter pith of the titular fruit. Rickety wooden tables littered the crimson carpets. Spilled champagne formed great fizzing puddles in every shadowed corner. Each table was occupied by rather more patrons than was good for it, the majority of the sweating men in evening dress, or the remains of it, with a quantity of backless white waistcoats slung over the chairs. The women, and there were many of them, less respectably dressed, some scarcely dressed at all. It was all quite ghastly, and I was very fond of it. Such establishments erupt onto the bloated body of the capital with the unerring regularity of a clap rash, but the Pomegranate Rooms was something of a special case. A hangover from the fever dream that had been the naughty 90s, I had once, within its stuffy, cigar-fume-drenched walls, espied our present monarch being attended to by a French noblewoman of uncertain virtue. I dropped into a chair at the only free table and ordered up some plonk. A fat board close by, rouged like an ingenue undertaker's first case, began at once to make eyes at me. I examined my nails until she lost interest. I cannot abide the obese, and in a whore it is surely tantamount to unprofessionalism. Her chums were not much better. I ate something to take away the taste of the champagne, and then smoked a cigarette to take away the taste of the food. I tried not to make it too obvious that I was on my lonesome. It is a terrible thing to dine alone. One stinks of desperation. With as much nonchalance as I could affect, I examined the play of the light on my champagne glass, while surreptitiously sneaking looks at the patrons in the hope of spotting something pretty. And then, without any ado whatsoever, a young woman glided into the seat opposite me. In a white satin dress with pearls at her throat and rather gorgeous blonde hair piled high, she looked like one of Sargent's slightly elongated females. I felt a stir down below that could have been the beginnings of indigestion, but probably had more to do with the way her dewy eyes were fixed on me. I lifted the plonk bottle and my eyebrows inquiringly. "You're rather out of place here, my dear," I said, as I poured her a glass. "I should say the Pomegranate Rooms rarely see the likes of you." She inclined her head slightly. "Got any fags?" A little taken aback, I nodded and took out my cigarette case. It is flat and well polished with my initials in Gothic script upon it, yet it has never been called upon to save my life by absorbing the impact of a bullet. That's what servants are for. "Armenian or Georgian?" I inquired. She took out one of the long black specimens that crammed the case's right-hand side and struck a match off the heel of her elegant shoe, lighting the cigarette in one rapid movement. Her brazen behaviour delighted me. "Lord, I was dying for that," said the vision, taking in great gulps of smoke. "Mind if I take one for later?" I waved a hand. "Oh, be my guest." She scooped up a dozen or so cigarettes and stuffed them inside her corset. "You're full of surprises," I managed. "Ain't I, though?" She laughed, gave a hoarse cough. "You on your own?" My performance had been penetrated. I poured myself another drink. "Alas!" She looked me up and down with what I can only describe as sauciness. "That's a shame. You're a looker." I could not deny it. "I like a tall gent," she continued. "You a foreigner?" I ran a hand through my long black hair. My complexion owes much to my Franco-Slavic mamma and little to my British papa. My waist is all my own work. I must have been proud of having such a bonny babe. A baroness once told me that she could cut her wrists on my cheekbones. Lots of girls died for you, have they? Only those who cannot live for me. She rested her chin on a gloved hand. You got cold eyes, though. Blue as poison bottles. Oh, really, you must desist, or I shall consider running away with myself. I placed my hand on hers. What's your name? She shook her head, blowing out a cloud of smoke and smiling. I don't like mine. I'd much rather hear yours. I fiddled lightly with my cufflink. Gabriel, I said, adopting one of my nom de guerre. Gabriel Ratchet. The nameless lovely took this in. That's an angel's name. I know, my dear, came my murmur, and I fear I may be falling. Chapter 2. On the Efficacy of Assassination. Both the night and my blood were far too hot to waste time journeying home, so I got to grips with my new acquaintance in a slimy alley at the back of the pomegranate rooms. I have a vivid memory of her raised skirts brushing against my chin and the feel of her very lovely bosom beneath my fine, white hands. Oh, I've mentioned them. As I plunged on, my eye caught a bill pasted haphazardly to the wet brickwork. Nellie Best was playing at the Collins Music Hall. I might just have time between this coupling and my next appointment to make the second house. Nellie was on fine form, and so was I, hearing her belt out, "Who were you with last night?" as I strolled into the upstairs bar-room and topped myself up and hock. Groping for a seat and tripping irresponsibly over the fetching white ankles of a dozen young ladies, the hall became one great, wonderful blur of gaseous colour and light. I felt as though I had tumbled head-first into one of Sickert's delightfully déclassé canvases. The hollowed shadows enveloped me in grimy red plush, Nellie Best's canary-yellow crinolines flaring before my grinning phiz like sunbursts. After several choruses too many of "Oh, what a silly place to kiss a girl," I tottered out into the balmy night and a cab. "Piccadilly," I cried, banging my cane rather unnecessarily against the roof. Shortly afterwards, I was deposited in front of the Royal Academy of Art. By day, I am naturally used to entering premises by the front door, but that night I took care descending the treacherously corkscrew steps down to the tradesman's entrance. Delilah, having finished her work at the dining rooms, was there to greet me with her broken-toothed smile. She ushered me through into a corridor tiled in black and white parquet. I threw off my cloak and hooked my hat carefully onto the horns of a stuffed ibex head, whose startled expression was not at all dissimilar to that of the late Everard Supple. At the very end of the room was a small and awfully discreet door, inlaid quite exquisitely with blonde marquetry in a pattern of peacock feathers. I went through the door and into a panelled hall lit by sputtering gas jets. There had been some excitable talk about having the electricity laid on, but I had used my meagre powers to veto this. I liked the atmosphere of the little journey. Somehow the flames and their bold brass stanchions felt like primitive torches in a secret tunnel. We all know the attraction of secret tunnels. When I was a boy, there was nothing in the world I wanted to discover more. It's quite rewarding finally to have one at the office. I stuffed my hands into my trouser pockets and whistled a few bars of Nellie Best's Best as I reached the end of the silent corridor. It terminated in a kind of ship's wheel, studded at the tip of each spoke with a porcelain button rather in the manner of bath taps. I tapped in a little sequence of letters corresponding to some code or other, and span the wheel to the left. Another discreet door, though not nearly so prettily carved, sprang open just to my right. Why they couldn't just let me knock, I'll never know. I passed through into a gentleman's lavatory. Planting my rump, avec trousers, you understand, onto the cold seat in one of the cubicles, I folded my arms and exhaled impatiently. It was a further 5 minutes before I heard the sound of footfalls and the opening and closing of the cubicle door next to mine. Finally, with a grim, protesting shriek, the metal wall dividing the cubicles began to rise. Sitting on the next poe along, impeccable in frock coat and imperial collar, was the dwarfish form of Joshua Reynolds, my boss, 3 feet something in his stocking feet, and ever so jolly.
"Hello, Lucifer," trilled the little fellow. He wriggled on the seat of the lavatory and pumped my hand. His tiny patent-leather shoes glistened in the gaslight. "Evening," I rejoined. "Still can't run to a proper office, eh?" Reynolds gave an impish laugh. "Oh, no. You know how we like it. Cloak and dagger, my boy, that's what we thrive on. And smoke and mirrors."
His eyes were bright and black in his face, like raisins in dough.
"Now then," he
continued, rubbing his pudgy hands together,
the business is concluded?"
I nodded and smiled my wide smile. "It is."
"And the package has been sent to Sebastopol?"
"Yes."
And was the transaction accomplished without undue—"
"If you mean, have I killed old Supple, then yes, I have," I cried. "Shot him in the chest and watched him die like the filthy dog he was." The little man sniffed and nodded. He seemed to suffer an eternal cold in the head. "A modicum of thanks would not go amiss," I ventured. Reynolds laughed explosively.
"What would you like me to say, my boy? That England owes you a great debt?"
"That would do to begin with. The nation will be forever and profoundly grateful, that sort of thing. But will the nation ever know it? To them the Honourable Everard will remain a gallant servant of the Empire."
"Is shot defending his own home by a vicious gang of roughs,"
put in J.R. "Is that what we're saying?"
"So I gather."
I shrugged lightly. "Yes, he will remain every inch the gallant lad, rather than the atrocious anarchist with plans to explode bombs under the Foreign Secretary that we know him to be, to have been."
Well, my boy,"
said Joshua Reynolds with a twinkle.
"that is why we call it Secret Service."
"Ah, now, the cat's out of the bag. There you are, having paid your few shillings at Mr. Smith's Emporium at Waterloo Station, if my memoirs ever make it out of the cistern, fully expecting the entertaining ramblings of the great Lucifer Box R.A., foremost portraitist of his age. A man must have ambition. And what do you discover? That in between my little daubs I was living a double life. It was a connection humble enough in origin. For reasons that are too painful and private to relate, I'd ended up owing a favour or two to our family solicitor. Joshua Reynolds, for it was he, despite being very small, turned out to be something very big in His Majesty's government. Strictly behind the scenes, you understand, and most secret. I like to flatter myself that he really couldn't manage without me. He peered at me now with a strange expression somewhere between a smile and a grimace.
"You're looking positively consumptive, dear heart,"
he said at last. "How you wound me! The Beardsley style is so unfashionable."
"Eat a little more."
"I find it difficult to manage on the pittance you pay." The little man sniffed back a drop of moisture from his nostril.
"Oh, now you're being cruel. Your late papa would never forgive me if I let you starve."
"Were I more at liberty, I could get by very well on my artistic commissions." He reached across and patted my hand. His own was dimpled fatly, like that of an overfed baby.
Of course. But my little problems do provide a more regular salary, eh? And not too much effort required on your part."
I smiled, admitting his point. Effort only in the service of pleasure. It may have seemed rash of them to give the job to an aberrant character like me, but I cannot deny how much I relished it. The world was my studio, and they laid on the apprentices to clean the brushes. Say there was a visiting Turkish despot to be bumped off. Furnished with the dry details, the artistic part would be left to me. I'd formulate a little plan with the domestics. Delilah, she of the daffodil frock, was one of the best, and off we'd toddle. The Ottoman offender would be taking a stroll in some pleasure garden, and if the night were a dark one, a swift dagger through the ribs might be enough. I would go off on my merry way, and the domestics would move in, eradicating any trace of my presence. A day or so later, the stabby would be found 100 miles away, in, let us say, Newcastle-under-Lyme, the victim of a crazed malcontent. The malcontent, usually the body of a vagrant, retrieved from the local mortuary, dressed up with a dagger clasped in his rapidly stiffening digits, was sometimes found there too. Within 24 hours, both corpses would be under Lyme themselves. Oftentimes, though, something a shade more baroque was called for, and Delilah and I would roll up our sleeves and embark on a coffee-fueled plotting session that was rather cheerfully like cramming for an examination. It was all terribly well done, and it lent one an immunity from even the vaguest threat of prosecution that was quite giddying. Artistic license to kill,
you might say. Joshua Reynolds, who really was the most frightful old woman— well, no, he really was a dwarf, but you follow me— glanced at me as I sank back against the cold lavatory wall and grinned at him. For once there was a flicker of something less pleasant in those bright black eyes.
"Enthusiasm is all very well, my dear Lucifer, but we mustn't get sloppy, must we? We must always remember that nasty business of the Bow Road."
I bristled at this, but held my tongue. As I say, some things are painful and private. I was a bit done in after all the evening's excitement, but it was clear the boss had more work for me. He blew his button nose and retrieved a file from his case. As he examined its contents, I examined my fingernails. In the morning, I thought, I would take a steam bath.
"You got my note?"
he said at length. "I'm afraid I haven't checked my correspondence. I was running late, you see, what with the murdering." The dwarf gazed in a puzzled fashion at the contents of his handkerchief.
"Do you know Poop?"
"Poop?"
"Jocelyn Poop. Our man in Naples. We received a wire from him some days ago."
He tossed me a square of buff paper. I read it over swiftly. "Verdigris sash. Most urgent. Details follow." I looked up. "Instructions to a curtain maker?"
Verdigris and Sash were both highly respected scientists.
"Were?"
"They died within a day of each other."
"Did they indeed?" I tapped the telegram against my chin. "And what more does Poop have to say?"
"Not a great deal. He's vanished."
"Like me to look into it?" Joshua Reynolds battered his eyelids.
"I'd be so grateful."
I took a file of papers from my erstwhile employer, and with a curt nod, stepped out of the lavatory. Out of habit, I washed my hands. Once back out into the humid night, I made my way towards Downing Street. I bade the bobby on duty outside number 10 a cheery good night, then let myself in to number 9. I know. Ostentatious, isn't it? But somebody has to live there. Chapter 3. The Mystery of the Two Geologists. My occupancy of number 9 is a long and not particularly edifying story. Once upon a time, my late papa's people owned the land whereon Downing Street was built, and though HMG grabbed most of it, they couldn't get their mitts on that one house, which, through some stubborn whimsy of the Boxes, was to remain in the family in perpetuity. And now, as last of the line, number 9 had come to me. More than anything, I wished to be shot of the place, but the terms of my inheritance were strict, and so impecunious old Lucifer occupied 3 rooms, more or less, on the ground floor of one of the grandest houses in London. The rest of the pointlessly huge edifice was shuttered, sheeted, quietly rotting, and likely to remain so unless I started to sell a lot more pictures. On the positive side, it was awfully handy for town. I woke to find myself fully dressed and on top of the bed, surrounded by a litter of files on the missing Poop and the late Professor's sash and verdigris. I must have drifted off in either a haze of data or a haze of hashish. I really cannot recall. I was about to call for my man Poplar when I remembered that he had taken a bullet in the back 3 weeks before on the southbound platform of a Serbian railway station. No silver cigarette case, you see. I sighed hugely. I'd certainly miss old Poplar, and his passing left me in the unfortunate position of requiring a new manservant. Taking a small propelling pencil from my waistcoat pocket, I scribbled the words "Get help" onto my shirt cuff as an aide-memoire. It was to be hoped that my laundress would not interpret this as the desperate plea of a kidnapped heiress hidden amongst my evening clothes. A manservant was one of the perks of the job, yet Joshua Reynolds seemed in no great hurry to furnish me with a new one. If things didn't improve soon, I was faced with the grisly prospect of getting in Delilah to rinse out my undergarments. I bathed in preparation for my Turkish bath and sent a note round to one of my pals expressing the desire that he join me there. The pal in question was a fiercely handsome and failingly cheerful lad called Christopher Miracle. To look at, you would think him one of those fellows who go stamping off around the world at a peacoat, having peninsulas named after them. In fact, he was one of the most famous portraitists in England, and was said to possess an extraordinary patience and delicacy of touch. He had not been born into wealth, but had earned it, imagine, and the gulf that existed between our financial situations resulted in the kind of slow-burning resentment that fuels the best friendships. As a result of his status, he was quite staggeringly well connected, and I had a fancy he might know something of my missing professors. The summer day was bright as a flare and stultifyingly humid. I was hard-pressed to notice any change in atmosphere between the outside and the interior of the Wigmore Street baths where I later found myself. As blonde and enthusiastic as a Labrador puppy, Christopher Miracle bounced startlingly out of the wreaths of steam and thumped me on the back as a token of his affection. "Box, old man, how are you? Looking distinctly peaky, I'd say. You getting enough nosh?" I made a place on the warm marble beside me. "You're not the first to speculate." He extended his long legs before him, the white towel around his waist pulling as taut and neat as a tablecloth. "Is there tea?" he cried, smoothing back a lock of wet blonde hair. "I must have tea." He snapped his fingers with the assurance of a born team captain, face already reddening in the heat, and sat with one leg up on the marble, as solid and impressive as the Velasquez Mars, having mislaid his helmet. Next to his frame, I did seem positively emaciated. We sipped at small glasses of sweet-smelling tea brought to us by a capaciously girthed Turk and fell into happy conversation, or gossip, if you prefer, denigrating the pompous and the talentless who we felt were being preferred over us. Merely assassinating someone's character made for a pleasant change. "By the way," said Miracle suddenly, "I'm having a party, or a ball, if you want to be grand, in honour of the return of Persephone, goddess of the summer. Possible you could come, or are you overcommitted?" "I collect invitations on the mantelpiece behind a bust of the late Queen. Just now, I fear Her Majesty would be pitched forward into the fireplace. I'd never miss one of your parties, though, Christopher. I trust there will be a superabundance of flesh." "Oh, I'm counting on it. I may invite one or two from my drawing class." "Drawing class?" "Oh, didn't I tell you? Oh, I've been taking a class for ladies in one of those mechanical institutes down in Chelsea. A weekly thing. Requires little effort on my part and has several benefits. Perhaps you should give it a bash." I sank back onto the seat and rested on my palms. "Benefits, eh? Let me guess," I mused. "Firstly, yes, it keeps you in regular contact with just the kind of idle rich who are liable to commission pictures from you." "Excellent." "Further enhancing your laurel-strewn reputation," I said, gazing thoughtfully at the steam-clouded ceiling. "Secondly, every now and then one such patron turns out to be a real stunner and game for a lark." Miracle laughed explosively. "Now, really, Box." "Thirdly, it allows you to put a little back into society by encouraging the artistic endeavours of those less talented than yourself." I smiled broadly. "I have, of course, put these benefits in order of priority." "Your reasoning, Box, is perfectly sound," said Miracle, with a grin. "I allow 12 of them in at any one time," he said, "probably for no better reason than it makes the occasion feel vaguely like a coven." "With you as the presiding demon?" "Naturally. They have tea, and there's a little chatter and not a little swooning around yours truly. Then my pupils set to work scrawling away quite appallingly with their charcoal of whatever I place in the centre of the room. It seems they have come to regard my classes as the highlights of their existence." I nodded to an orderly, who came forward with a brass bowl of cold water. I splashed my face and ran a hand through my hair. "What a shining light you are, Miracle," I ejaculated. "How come that booby Holman Hunt never did your portrait in that hideous style of his?" Miracle chuckled. "Speaking of pictures," I said, "didn't you once paint a scientist chap called Verdigris?" Miracle thought for a moment. "Believe I did. Great fat fellow. Eyes spaced too wide like a flatfish. Come to think of it, I heard he'd vanished, along with some old pal of his called Sash." I, too, had heard something of the kind. "Don't know much about the other. Seems they both suffered a sort of seizure. Are you digging for something?" I shrugged. Alone amongst my friends, Miracle had some idea of my other life, but even then thought it no more than the hobby of an over-diligent gossip. "Geologists, I gather," I said at last. Miracle nodded. "Old Cambridge chums. Verdigris died the day after Sash. Very rum. Life's full of coincidences." "So they say," laughed Miracle. "Do you think these events are connected? I'll see what I can root out." For a while we sat in silence, steeped in the lethargy induced by the chamber's broiling heat. Occasionally the mists cleared, revealing the green and red tiled arches of the roof. The baths hummed with human traffic, the hissing of the coals, the distant ploosh of patrons in the plunge pools. the heavy sighing of thick-set, red-faced gents, towels wrapped like swaddling around their hard bellies. After a time, Miracle smiled, thrust out his lower lip, then patted my leg and rose. "Shan't be a moment. Nature calls." I watched him stride away through the billowing steam clouds and was so engrossed by the progress of a great heavy drop of sweat down my face that I almost failed to notice a veiny forearm suddenly clamp itself around my gullet. With a gasp, I sank my fingers into the flesh of the arm. Struggling to stand, I found myself hauled backwards by a wild strength. My back struck the slippery marble steps, and for a second or so my head swam. "Blackguard!" hissed a voice in my ear. "Scoundrel!" Well, I had been called worse. I twisted my head wildly to one side, attempting to catch sight of my attacker, but the clouds of steam showed only glimpses of glistening flesh and a pair of goggling, enraged eyes beneath thick black brows. His arm tightened around my throat. I kicked out at the brass bowl in a desperate effort to attract the attention of the attendants, but with lightning speed my assailant began to drag me towards a neglected niche. The towel slipped from my waist, and I felt my buttocks sliding over the seat. I croaked frantically. Would one of the elderly gentlemen in their steamy shrouds notice and raise the alarm? But a ruddy hand with hairy knuckles was quickly planted over my mouth. I was completely helpless. Salty sweat stung at my eyes. "No, you villain! No, I have you!" The fellow's breath was stale with tobacco. I was on my haunches, my senses whirling. Yet, at the very moment of defeat, I snatched a chance of victory. Using the brute's heaviness to my advantage, I shoved backwards against him and drove my elbow savagely into his midriff. He gave a startled cry, fell lumpenly against the tiles, and momentarily slackened his iron grip on my head and neck. It was all I needed. Springing to my feet, I whirled around and kicked him in the throat, my leg extended with the grace of a dancer, even if I do say so myself. His hand flew to his Adam's apple, but I gave him no quarter, pummeling his face with my fists and then, after taking a handful of his wet hair, cracking his face off the wall. "What is this?" I gasped. "What do you want with me?" The fellow was revealed now, a great, hirsute, middle-aged creature with long, oily moustaches and a face as red as a brick. Where had I seen the ugly bastard before? In the criminal archives of the Viennese police, perhaps? Or was he one of the Brotherhood of Blind Assassins who had sworn revenge on me after the affair of the Prussian martyrs? Those enraged eyes glared at me still. With a snarl, he put his head down and charged at me. I stepped swiftly to one side, but he caught me round the waist, and together we stumbled back into the main chamber. By now, of course, we had been noticed. As we whirled about, feet slithering on the wet floor, I had a confused impression of white towels and scarlet faces, mouths opened in wide O's of astonishment. The Turk who had brought Miracle's tea hovered around us, arms flapping, like the referee in a wrestling bout. "Can't we discuss this like gentlemen?" I gasped. He rose from my naked waist and jabbed a fist at my face. I sidestepped clumsily, feet skidding. "Gentlemen! You!" he spat. The Turk was at his elbow, his face a mask of misery. Please, sirs, if you have business, let it be concluded in the—" He said no more, as my attacker laid him out with a swift right to the underside of his swarthy jaw, and he fell to the tiles like a sack of coal. I cracked a fist against my assailant's cheekbone. "Christ!" I yelled, sucking my knuckles. He screwed up one eye in pain and jabbed at me again. "Lucifer Box! Ha! Was ever a rascal so well named? You are the devil, sir, the very devil!" I ducked from his fist and managed to land a serious wallop on the side of his head. He staggered and almost fell on the treacherous floor. "Bringer of light, I assure you," I cried. My blood was up, and so were my fists as I circled the monster. Lucifer was the brightest and most beautiful of the angels, till that old Marjorie of a deity got so jealous that he cast him out. He snarled at this, and succeeded in punching me with sickening force in the ribs. Crying out in pain, I dropped, winded, my knees smacking on the floor with a snap like wishbones. The fellow stalked up to me and grasped a great hunk of my hair. "Bringer of light! What have you brought to my household but misery and scandal? My God, sir, I shall thrash the life out of you before I'm done." I shook my head miserably. Who are you?" He sneered at me, his moustaches hanging limply around his red mouth like those of a Chinaman. "I am Pug, sir. Major Strangeways Pug." "Oh," I said simply. "And it is my daughter, my sweet little Avril, whom you have despoiled and ruined." I winced as he tightened his grip on my hair. Remembrance swept over me like cold water from the Turk's brass bowl. A party, some months previously. Whey-faced poets, frayed cuffed artists, all the splendid flotsam of bohemian London life. And a girl with a dog's name and the body of a goddess. Avril Pug. There'd been a balcony, starlight, whispered words, then something very cheeky in the rhododendrons. Now there was a father. He raised his great fist and drew it back. I watched it swing towards me through streaming eyes. Then there came a strange, bright clang, and Pug crashed to the floor, his addled eyes rolling up in his head like those of a doll. I looked up and saw my friend standing over the unconscious Major, a filigreed Turkish tea-urn still swinging in his right hand. "Miracle!" I groaned. "Too bloody right!" he cried, grasping my hand and pulling me to my feet.